Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this video in the GCSE Biodiversity and Ecosystems topic, that little one at the end. This one, I'm afraid, is going to be quite downbeat. I'm sorry, it is just what it is. We've got to cover these bits of the syllabus. I'm going to try and cover everything related to pollution and waste in one video to sort of concentrate all the miserableness, but this is really not a jolly subject, and it's something that I hope that you are not only interested in to pass the GCSEs, but something that you are personally angry about. I mean, I know I am, and I really hope that in your lifetime, my lifetime, we can change some of the way that we are acting as far as use of nature as basically a rubbish bin. Okay, so this is the first bit of syllabus that we are looking to cover here. Okay. We've got pollution types in water, in air and on land, and there are various processes that occur differently in each of those media. Air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, slightly different, and I'm going to try and rattle through them all very quickly in this video. So there's quite a lot of content in here. As I say, I'm trying to concentrate all of this stuff, and apologies for the downbeat nature of this video. Right, so let's go straight in. So land pollution. The main sort of things we're talking about here from GCSE purposes are things like landfill, release of toxic chemicals and leaching. The idea that if you concentrate a bunch of stuff into the land and it rains, then you get leaching of chemicals into the soil around this. Now, when you've got waste, you've really got a number of options, right? You can either reuse and recycle it, right, which obviously is the best thing you can do, or if it's genuine waste, you can either concentrate it somewhere, pile it up where no one looks like, or you can try and spread it out so thin that nobody notices that it's there. Okay, those are really your two options as far as waste disposal goes, right? And they're not ideal. So let's talk about landfill, which historically has been the way that in the UK we've disposed of a lot of our waste. Now, it is obviously reducing the amount of waste that goes to landfill, thankfully, but there is still an awful lot of land that has basically been rubbish dumps, right, either currently or historically. And here's an example from quite near us, right, which is Packington landfill, which was the biggest landfill site in the country, just between Birmingham and Coventry. It was near the airport there. Now, thankfully, this one was closed due to the uptake of recycling and the fact this area was no longer needed as a landfill, which is a big result. But to give you an idea, 1.5 million square metres in area, and at its height, an 81 metre high pile of rubbish. So a 1.5 million square metre area of rubbish piled up 81 metres high. Okay, that is huge. It's a huge amount of rubbish from the Midlands and further afield that was piled up just by the airport there. And if you look at the satellite imagery, you can actually see that the entire international airport is about on the same scale as what was this landfill. Okay, an absolute vast area. But fortunately, we have closed this down. Doesn't mean we've got rid of landfill altogether in this country, as we're going to come to in a moment. So why is landfill bad? Well, as I say, you are piling up a load of stuff, potentially doesn't biodegrade, potentially that has hazardous chemicals in them that will then leach into the environment around. Okay, you can't farm particularly well right next to landfill because of the idea of leaching. It's depending on what's been buried there, and of course you've got release of toxic gases, releases of things like methane, greenhouse gases into the environment from landfill as well. So it's generally not a nice environment. Okay. So obviously the alternative in terms of reducing land pollution is recycling, okay, which is great. It's on the up. We're all aware of recycling. I don't think anyone here who isn't. Okay, if we look at the rate of recycling by country, this is taken straight from the BBC in terms of England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. We're now sort of Wales leading the way there. Look, with more than 50% of its rubbish recycled by 2017. Of course, this has gone up a little bit more, but we're still not really recycling even half of the waste that we produce, which means that the rest of it does unfortunately go to landfill. And unfortunately, the stuff that you do recycle often just gets exported. The contract for your recycling gets given to a private company, and what they do is not often checked on. There is a thing called the End Users Charter, or the End Destinations Charter, which various councils sign up to, but a lot of it is simply exported to recycling centres around the world. So for example, Stratford-upon-Avon, if you go digging around in all the council documents, you can eventually find where our rubbish ends up, okay, where the rubbish for that town ends up. Lots of that just gets simply exported. For example, in Stratford, plastic and paper tends to get exported to Thailand and India. But then what happens to it there? Probably it might just end up in landfill in another country. Hooray, recycling. So there's been a big push on sort of working this out. The BBC has done a lot of work on this in investigative journalism, that kind of stuff. And various big companies have been fined for doing this practice, but it is worth thinking about. Okay, in terms of land use, where does your rubbish actually end up? Because it really is just one planet. Okay, right, so that's your land pollution. We use land poorly for waste storage, for landfill, all that kind of stuff, which can lead to leaching, toxic waste, all that kind of stuff, right? So let's move on to water. So we've got two really important processes here: bioaccumulation, eutrophication, and then of course we've got to mention plastic. And this whole topic really is a good opportunity for examiners to give you data, and there's an absolute ton of possible opportunities to give you data here. So let's define those couple of terms. Now these are important key processes and key terms within biology. So bioaccumulation is essentially where if you put a poison or something into the environment, okay, and a sort of famous example was DDT, a pesticide that contained mercury, that kind of thing, into the environment. Even if you spread it out really, really, really thin, whether that's land or water, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't ever break down, then what happens is the little creatures eat a little bit of that, okay, and you might think that's fine, they're the ones we're trying to kill anyway with our pesticide, that's fine, but then the next individual up the food chain might eat 10 or 100 of those individuals further down the food chain, and all the poison in there would concentrate into that one organism, and then that organism itself would be one of maybe 10 eaten by a predator above that, and all the poison would concentrate into that organism. So this poison, famously DDT, that was sprayed around, what we're spraying around in really, really, really low concentrations, really tiny concentrations, okay, so it can't really hurt anything apart from the little aphids, little bugs we're trying to kill. And then suddenly, soon after that, top predators started dropping down dead with high amounts of poison in their body. That process is called bioaccumulation. It happens on land, sure, but it's also particularly acute in water. Okay, if obviously you spray, so something gets released into water, then obviously lots of water creatures will absorb that and it will accumulate up the food chain, which is why any pesticides or herbicides that you buy now, and of course you can garden and farm without those things, that's absolutely fine, and now have to, by law, have a sort of half-life whereby they break down so they do not accumulate in food chains. Okay, but anything can accumulate if it ends up in our food chain and in living organisms. Okay, so that is the process of bioaccumulation, a very dispersed, spread out toxin at the bottom of the food chain. If it doesn't break down, accumulates up to its in a high and lethal concentration in the top predator. Okay, so a similar but not the same but related process is the one of eutrophication. Okay, now this is if into water ends up going some fertilizers, something that increases the nutrient level of water. Now this could be the sea, it could be lakes, it could be ponds, it could be a river, whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay, so let's imagine a farmer's got a field and he's spraying his crop with a fertilizer, whatever it is, and that fertilizer rains and it runs off because they've gone too close to the bank of the river or the bank of the lake. As you can see from the picture here, the nutrient ends up in the water. That promotes the algae, right? It promotes algal bloom, what's called an algal bloom. So the algae that were previously limited by that lack of nitrogen, lack of iron, whatever it might be, grow like crazy into a big green mat on top of the water. Then the sun, the solar energy, can't get in to get to some of the water plants further down. As we know, photosynthesis releases oxygen, so all this water under here gets lower and lower and lower and lower in terms of oxygen. Okay, it becomes anoxic. Okay, so it's a scarce oxygen content down there. That means that material will die and starts to decompose. The decomposing bacteria use up whatever oxygen is left, and the amount of oxygen that's in the water basically disappears. Okay, and that causes the death of the ecosystem. Okay. We've got a completely anoxic, hypoxic ecosystem there, no oxygen left. Every organism underneath the algae will die, right? And you end up with the water becoming what we call putrid. Okay, so that's called eutrophication. Of course, the way to deal with it is to lower the nutrient content of the water and get rid of the algae, and then eventually the ecosystem will blossom back as the nutrient level goes down. Okay, but of course with intensive farming, intensive agriculture, right, very close to watercourses, you do get an awful lot of eutrophication. Now in the UK we have laws, okay, a lot of them are European laws on what we can do, so we might have been able to get out of those, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing. Personally, I think that environmental laws need to be strengthened rather than weakened. So what we end up with here in this country is we end up with margins, we end up with borders. So there are gaps between where we spray fertilizers and the water. Okay, so we limit / reduce or eliminate eutrophication. In other parts of the world, that's not the case. If I show you this is a lake in China, which due to intensive agriculture seasonally turns this bright green through eutrophication. And it's not like it's a sort of, oh, lovely novel green water. No, it's sort of thick, gloopy algal stuff that gets so thick you can sort of pick it up by hand. Okay, so that's eutrophication. So bioaccumulation, eutrophication are important aspects of pollution, water. Okay, and I couldn't do this bit without mentioning microplastics. Now, we've been producing plastics for about a century now. Plastic does not biodegrade, as we know. It just basically erodes into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. These are called microplastics. Okay, they enter food chains and they're completely indigestible. And what they actually do is they take up space in the food, in the guts, take space of food in guts of organisms, and animals basically starve with their bellies full, because a floating plastic bag might look like a jellyfish, right? Or these tiny little microplastics make their way into very small creatures, which then bioaccumulate up the food chain and essentially poison whales and dolphins and sharks and so on and so forth. Okay, so absolute environmental catastrophe globally, right? There's not a part of the world that isn't touched by this. And in fact, geologists have said we're actually entering a new geological epoch, because in the in the fossil record, in the top layer of the sort of geological record, you can now actually see human activity, and you'll start to see a layer of plastics. And there are beaches in islands, and in Hawaii have complained about this, where more of the sand is now microplastic than it is sand. Okay, so terrible, worrying thing that's happening on this planet. Okay, and obviously I don't like these photos, but this is the reality when we start dumping this much plastic into the sea. So I want to show you some. I'm going to show you some not very nice photos in a moment, thanks to this man down here, Chris Jordan. This is a photo credit for him coming up, but you might have heard of this, in the Pacific Ocean there's a thing called the sort of western garbage patch and the eastern garbage patch. This is because of sort of Pacific tides that go around, currents that go around, and basically bring loads of plastic into garbage islands, as they're called. And these things are absolutely massive. They're bigger than some countries, okay, just of plastic waste floating on the top. And of course animals don't know the difference between this and food. So there's a place, there's some islands called Midway, there's an island called Midway Island, Midway Atoll, okay, which is the home of Pacific albatross. And if you go to Midway Island at the moment, it's not a particularly pretty place, because what you will find is you will find a lot of dead and a lot of decaying albatrosses here, and as they decay, the reason for their demise becomes apparent. Their guts are entirely full of plastic. So as you can see over here, we've got things like cigarette lighters, various things in the guts of these birds. So they're picking these things up from the sea, thinking that they're edible. Obviously their gut is then full of indigestible material and they starve to death. Okay, which is obviously very, very sad. So it affects us as well, microplastics, for example. This was a study done by, you can see the reference down at the bottom here, right, Environmental Science and Technology 2019. You can see the reference just down here of how many microplastic particles are found per gram or litre or metre cubed of selected consumables. And bottled water is terrible for microplastics. So bottled water has huge amounts of microplastics in it per bottle. Beer, air, we're even breathing in microplastic particles. They're that small, that light, they can float around in the air. You've got tap water, seafood, sugar, salt, so on and so forth. And that is entering you. That's small enough not only to enter your gut, but also to enter your bloodstream, right? Which is not an ideal scenario. If you want to put that in some more user-friendly statistics, we've got here 13 million tons of plastic leak into our oceans annually. Some would say leak, I would say are put by people who are unscrupulous about this. 500 billion, so 500 billion disposable plastic bags are used worldwide each year. There's absolutely no reason for that. 50% of consumer plastics are single use, and so on and so forth. You can read through those things yourself, okay? So what can you do, right? Obviously, this is all sort of standard eco stuff, which I'm sure you've heard before, but it's worth doing, like avoiding single plastic drinking straws, so on and so forth, taking bags to the supermarket. Bulk food, some people don't think of. You buy, you know, a 3 kilogram bag of pasta versus 1 kilograms. You've basically saved yourself 2 bags there. Using glass or steel reusable things, I'm sure you do. Spot where plastics are being snuck in. For example, tea bags have plastics in them for some reason. There's no need for that. Also, if we're all getting a brand new mobile phone every 18 months and phone upgrades and so on and so forth, why are we doing that? Okay, what's the point in that? Where's all that plastic coming from and all those metals in the electronics? Also, Christmas. Okay, crackers that have got a tiny little toy in them that you pull on Christmas Day. You pick the toy up and you go, and then you throw it away. Right? That comes from oil which was formed millions and millions of years ago, and its whole life journey has been just to get to your table at Christmas so you can look at it for 5 seconds and throw it away. Okay, there is no need for these things. Okay, obviously, you know, this is what I'm doing here, but make those people around you aware of the importance of reducing the consumption of plastic. And you guys, the young people these days, are much better at that than certainly people were when I was young, and also people older than me. Be that guy, right? Actually say, do we need this? Do we need to have that? Pay attention to, put your plastic waste in the correct recycling container. You might not be able to affect what the council does with it, but you can at least recycle properly within the rules. And avoid using cosmetics that have microplastics. Lots of facial scrubs actually put microplastics in them deliberately. You don't need to do that. Right? And you also don't need plastic clothes that you throw away every 5 minutes. Right? And obviously, reusing and recycling any plastic packaging you can is brilliant, particularly if you're into your gardening. Garden pots, they don't need throwing away. Recycle, reuse them. Okay, so that's the second section. On to the last section now in terms of air pollution, and we are going to skip over a few bits here because climate change is a separate lesson. Right, so for example, let's start with smoke. So we've got smoke, acid rain and carbon dioxide here. So smoke, air pollution. You might have seen this story last year in the news about wood burners, some fuels for household wood burners being banned. Because again, it's been shown, right, that in some cases, right, air pollution, so particles of uncombusted material that come out of wood burners, are small enough not only to enter your lungs, but also to get through your alveoli into your blood and increase the risk of heart disease and stroke. And that was shown. Now, I have a log burner and I like it, right? But I can't argue that this is real science, and I'm going to have to modulate how often and what I use in my log burner. Okay, so they can be breathed in, cause breathing and circulation problems. Okay, so for example, this year, the most polluting fuels are going to be banned in the homes. Things like wet wood and coal. Okay, which, you know, you can't argue that that isn't actually a good idea when you read the information. So smoke is unburnt material from combustion that can cause breathing issues, circulation issues, and stroke. Okay, and that's all you need to know. And also, this is becoming more and more of an issue. You might have seen this news story about a girl who died from severe asthma in London, and the coroner did indeed put her death partly down to air quality within London, okay, which obviously is a landmark case because obviously that means that someone has a responsibility to do something about it. So let's move on then to acid rain. You should know this bit from chemistry, but every time we burn something, releasing sulfur dioxide and maybe nitrogen oxide, these things from forms of combustion, they combine with the air, the water in the air, the moisture in the air to form sulfuric and nitric acid. That then falls on plants, kills them, changes the pH of soil, causes problems. We can see down here some experimental sort of plants here, experimental clover, where we've got normal and acidic water on them, and as you see they've gone away. And this is seen from Norway, who are generally fairly displeased with us because we have prevailing southwesterly winds. All of our pollution ends up going up into the air and being pushed over to Scandinavia and then falling as acid rain on their lovely spruce forests. Okay, so killing plants and changing the pH of lakes, killing fish, so on and so forth, right? So it doesn't take a genius. You've probably done this before. The idea that as we burn stuff, nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxide form acidic gases in the air, wind blows them over somewhere else and they fall as acid rain. Okay, pretty straightforward. Right, just a little bit on carbon dioxide, because this is where we are going to finish, and we're going to look at climate change in more detail in another lesson. Obviously, it's the result of combustion, and combustion has fueled our economic development since the Industrial Revolution. Carbon dioxide insulates the Earth. We do need some in the atmosphere. We need a greenhouse layer. Problem is, there's too much of it now. It's getting thicker, and as you can see, the global temperature is going up. Right, very, very rapidly. Anyone saying, oh, well, global temperatures fluctuate normally, what they're talking about is this, okay? When we're talking about man-made climate change, what we're talking about is that bit at the end. And anyone who says it doesn't happen is wrong, and there is really no other way to put it. It's not a debate. This is happening, okay? So that's obviously for another lesson. So GCSEs aside, I hope that this is something that you think is important as well. I certainly do. There are different things you can do. Obviously, you can act personally to reduce, reuse, recycle, and make sure that your impact on the world is as little as possible. But if you are living in a developed country, UK, Europe, America, whatever, a lot of this stuff comes from the system. It comes from your country, your nation. So obviously, protest, lobby, campaign, get involved. Do things that are useful to try and make sure, climate change action, the sort of, as you can see, the climate change protests here were largely populated by young people, and I applaud them, right? If you were out on that and doing that, well done, good for you, right? So these are all sort of things you can do, GCSEs aside. Okay, so that's a very quick run through. All of the pollution stuff. I hope that makes sense, and I'll see you next time for another video. Thanks very much, bye-bye.